I knew I would enjoy going back to GreedFall when the Gold Edition was announced. First released in 2019, developed by Spiders and published by Focus Home Interactive, GreedFall already felt like a game out of time. In many ways, it still feels like it belongs at the beginning of the last generation, sharing more in common with older RPGs like Elix, The Witcher 2, and Dragon Age Origins. This is not to say it's a bad thing, as the bulk of the experience feels classic rather than dated. GreedFall does little to innovate the genre. Rather, it relies on tried and tested designs. Think of complex characters, an unpredictable main quest line, lengthy secondary and companion quests that actually influence the main plot, and plenty of player choice when it comes to dialogue and character builds. It also does something the Witcher games do so well, ensure that no quest ever goes exactly to plan, and that the outcomes are rarely predictable. In GreedFall, you take control of Teer Fradee, male or female, and lightly customizable, the newly appointed legate for the neutral, commerce-focused congregation of merchants, a small princedom wedged between two warring nations on the mainland. Teer Fradee is tasked with assisting their governor-cousin in managing an outpost and maintaining relations with the other powers on the recently colonized island of Teer Fradee. On one side, there's the religious Teleme, with their smooth-talking missionaries and fanatical inquisitors. On the other, the science-oriented Bridge Alliance that pursues morally and ethically dubious research. Naturally, the concerns of the nature and balance-oriented Teer Fradee natives are broadly ignored. The colonial powers are on Teer Fradee to try find a cure for a lethal plague, the Malachor, that is ravaging the mainland populations. Naturally, they're also using the opportunity to push their own agenda on the native population. Think forceful religious conversions, or unwilling test subject status. Despite the setting, GreedFall doesn't do too much with its Age of Colonization themes. Sure, you get perspectives from multiple sides, as these powers attempt to justify their aggressive expansion, one-sided conflicts, exploitation of resources, and experimentation. However, the plot quickly reveals that your protagonist has a link to the island, and ultimately revolves around a major threat that affects all factions. The setting does, however, provide a solid narrative and structural foundation that pushes the importance of maintaining diplomatic relations and the trust of your diverse group of companions, which also includes some romances I avoided in my recent playthrough. These gamified relationships have an impact on the ending sequence and state-of-the-world post-game, but feel most impactful during the second half of the game, when you begin to see the ramifications of your early choices and are forced to make far-reaching decisions under pressure. You'll quickly realize companion and secondary quests are vital, as key events can play out differently based on their trust levels and some interconnected events. Although it may not reach the lofty heights of BioWare's classic Infinity Engine RPGs, GreedFall always reminds you, or punishes you, based on your choices and party composition. Avoiding hostilities and aiding characters early in the game can drastically simplify events later on when their support is needed. When dealing with one of the major factions, taking a companion who belongs to said faction often results in unique dialogue options, the ability to push for preferable outcomes, or maybe just an alternative way of resolving the quest. Even if every other element of the game puts you off, GreedFall still has great writing and a divergent narrative you'll want to see through to the end. GreedFall plays a lot like Spider's prior RPGs, just with plenty of refinement. You travel between semi-open regions, you engage with quest givers, solve quests through dialogue, investigations, subtlety or violence, tackle a few puzzles, and continuously improve your character. From the opening moments, GreedFall leans into its classic inspirations. The prologue sequence can last you easily 3 to 4 hours if you do everything on offer. It serves as a microcosm of the game that lets you know what you're in for. The impact of player choice, with regard to your build, dialogue choices, and quest solutions, is made obvious early on. Skills, attributes, and talents affect combat, exploration, and the potential solutions available to you. That said, you're never locked out of progress. If, for example, you don't have the ability to intimidate or sneak past foes, you could always fight your way through. However, a subtle or diplomatic approach almost always offers a better outcome. Skills dictate your combat abilities, a gameplay element that still features prominently when you've got numerous beasts, bandits, and rogue elements to deal with. You can wield melee weapons, firearms, alchemical potions, and even magic spells. Attributes define your proficiency with weapons, armor, and magic, limiting your ability to equip high-tier gear without them. Talents are by far the most important aspect of your character build and will have the greatest impact on quests. If you're being diplomatic, charisma, intuition, and science offer a range of dialogue and investigation modifiers. Lockpicking and vigor open up new routes in and around each location. Craftsmanship is perhaps the most limited in application, as you can still buy quest items you can't craft yourself, but it does allow you to enhance your gear greatly, offsetting character weaknesses if you've chosen not to focus on a combat-oriented build. Compared to many streamlined RPGs or action RPGs, your progress is, at least initially, severely limited by your character build. It's a rare experience these days, where limiting the player in any way is considered taboo by most developers. However, you'll quickly discover your companions can play an important part in bolstering your abilities, beyond their aforementioned contributions to dialogue and quest solutions. You can attempt to play as a jack of all trades, something that's viable on easy and normal difficulties, but thankfully companions always follow a min-max leveling path. This ensures you always have a party that can equip the best gear and remain efficient in a fight. Better still, improving your relationship with them unlocks passive talent bonuses when they're with you in the party. By default, combat plays out in real time. There are light and heavy attacks, parries, dodges, and a dozen hotkeys you can set for abilities, spells, and consumables. However, you can always tactically pause to prioritize targets and queue up skills or consumables. On lower difficulties, the responsive controls and mostly robust AI companions make it viable simply to play as an action RPG. Other gameplay elements include a simple stealth system, a disguise mechanic if you keep a set of faction-specific armor on hand, and, most importantly, the need to juggle your diplomatic and companion scores by justifying your actions, betraying other factions when needed, or simply lying your way past accusations. It ensures simply resolving a situation is not enough. You have to convince the involved factions that your actions were the right ones. Moving on to what's new in the Gold Edition. The first, and perhaps most underwhelming edition, is the De Vespe Conspiracy expansion. It plays out as a lengthy secondary quest in a new region to the northeast of Teer Fradee. For first-time players, or those replaying from the beginning, you'll have to progress through a good chunk of the story to access it. Events follow on from earlier investigations into Desade's link to the island, and certain characters need to be indisposed to avoid potential dialogue or interactions that were not planned for. The new location looks as beautiful as the rest of the island, but ultimately feels underutilized. There are a few new enemies to fight, with a greater focus on speed and mobility rather than just more armor points, and there's some new, unique gear to find. The missions themselves dig deeper into continental lore and political machinations, but events ultimately feel both detached from the main plot, and you spend too much time in old locations. Sure, I'll accept it's the downside of an expansion that was probably never planned for, but the basic premise just lacks urgency compared to other quests available at that point in the story. At least your companions and several key allies all have a part to play with unique lines of dialogue. All things considered, it was an enjoyable enough 2 to 3 hour diversion, but it could have been better integrated. The second big addition are the next-gen visual upgrades. However, based on my fuzzy memory, that simply means a choice between quality and performance modes. Think higher resolutions at 30 frames per second, or lower resolutions at 60 frames per second. Before tackling these modes, it's worth noting GreedFall looked great at times, and it still does. Bustling colonial towns and native villages, windswept coastlines, temperate forests, hazy swamps, mountain paths. The outdoor areas still look great thanks to the use of vibrant colors, fine details, atmospheric lighting, ambient audio, and a strangely serene soundtrack. The reuse of assets is also less obvious in outdoor locales, whereas interiors are the worst offenders, especially as you'll be visiting locations like the governor's palaces and the barracks repeatedly. Admittedly, distant terrain can look simple, and you'll spot plenty of low-resolution textures alongside detailed ones, but GreedFall still manages to create a world that feels epic in scale, mysterious, and magical. The day-night cycle ensures you get several beautiful sunrises and sunsets while you explore. Major landmarks are also visible throughout the island, and several large ones are also found within each zone, ensuring it all feels cohesive. Returning to those next-gen upgrades, they don't radically change the visual makeup of the game, but the choice of a quality and performance mode is a welcome one. Personally, performance mode is the clear winner, running at a near stable 60 frames per second, which is well worth the hit to the resolution. Movement and animations always felt a little stiff in GreedFall, so running at a higher frame rate just makes the experience feel more fluid, while still looking better than the last-gen versions. The other notable improvement is the loading time. You're looking at maybe 5 to 6 seconds for loading into a large zone, and instantaneous if you're traveling within a zone. This is a boon considering late-game quests often have you bouncing between cities and villages. So despite my love for GreedFall, it's obviously not a perfect game and there are some caveats. Spiders have come a long way, but old habits die hard. Navigating city streets and labyrinthine interiors is still annoying when you have to do it repeatedly. As a result, any investigation and dialogue-focused missions within these cities are much less exciting than exploring ancient ruins, forests, swamps, and caves. GreedFall is also a game that makes use of every location for something quest-related, so those fond of systematically exploring regions could find themselves annoyed having to return repeatedly later. The gear system could probably have done with some more visual variety, and the fast travel system, which works about 80% of the time, still lacks fast travel points outside governors' palaces and the city barracks. It's an infurious oversight, given how often they feature in quests. Some quests do actually allow you to fast travel at their conclusion, or straight back to an important location, but this isn't consistently applied. That said, while those gripes have the potential to frustrate players, I still feel GreedFall does far more right than wrong in comparison to Spider's previous RPGs. It takes classic elements, introduces some modern sensibilities, provides an engaging new world to explore, a ton of lore, a deep diplomacy and trust system, and enjoyable action-based combat. It has brisk pacing, and very few quests feel like the bland filler used to pad out so many RPGs. The Gold Edition reaffirms my belief that a lot of thought and intelligent design was used by a really small team to create a complex, diverging narrative and a beautiful world to explore. I just hope the release of this Gold Edition introduces more gamers to this fantastic IP.